Okay, guys, welcome. For those who are here for the first time, we're learning Sefer Devorah from the Ramak, Rabbi Meir. The Sefer is about emulating the Middah of Hashem. Specifically, what the Patron of Devorah calls Middos Elyonos. We know there are Yud Gimel Middos Harachamim. There are the Elyonos and there are Tachtonos. We explained what the difference is. One Perush is the Elyonos are the Middos you could not have conceived of on your own. Maybe the Tachtonos you could have figured out from nature, from seeing how Hashem created the world. Another Perush is the Tachtonos are how those Middos are manifest in this world, as opposed to the Elyonos are the reality of how Hashem is in Shamayim. Okay, so the first Middah that we discussed last week was the Middah of Mikel Kamoicha, which is basically the idea that every moment Hashem is infusing a person with life. If Hashem would cease for a moment infusing us with life, the heart couldn't breathe, the lungs couldn't inhale, we would not function. We would cease to exist. In other words, every millisecond Hashem is pumping life into us. It's not that Hashem like wound us up and then say, okay, go, and don't bother me. Every minute Hashem is giving us life. So at a time we're doing an Avera, Hashem should say, so why am I giving you life now? But Hashem tolerates. He's soivel the shame. He's soivel the insult that He's giving us life and we're using it against Him. So and the lesson was, even if you're giving someone kindness and they're, so to speak, using it against you, to learn to tolerate it. We're up to the second Middah. The second Middah is even more astounding than the first Middah. By the way, last week we learned a piece in the Ramak about traveling. Sham is traveling tomorrow, so we have to chazer that over. That the Patron of Devorah says that when a person travels, I'm also traveling, so I have an ulterior motive over here.
I said this over to Ellie today.
What?
I said this over to our friend we were traveling with.
Oh yeah? That what?
Gullus.
Yeah.
Gullus, we're like the Shechina.
That's pretty good, you remember that, wow.
Oh, I listened to it today.
Oh, that's pretty good.
I listened to it this morning.
Nice.
I was in Florida.
So basically, there's a Middah that Hashem, the Shechina, is in Galus. So therefore, when we go into Galus, we should say we're emulating the Shechina. Don't take all your comforts with you. And by going into Galus, you become the Merkava to the Shechina. So tomorrow, especially Cleveland is like the darkest of all the Galus. No, I'm joking. Yeah. So if you're going to... no, there are a lot of nice people in Cleveland. But, what?
Farm too.
You should think that you're emulating the Shechina and you're becoming a Merkava to the Shechina. Last week we learned from the great-great-grandfather of the Chida, the Chesed Avram, that remember we learned that the Ramak wrote a Sefer Hagerushin of all the Chidushim that came to him in his journeys, and the Chesed Avram says, Reb Shem Bar Yochai, Roiv Divreim Hayu B'drachim. Most of their learning was on the road. And this wasn't a coincidence, it was B'kavana. Why? Because after the Churban, the Shechina is in Golos, and it's going from one, in Yiddish you say a fardarbana spot to another, one low spot to another, so the tzaddikim, by going into Golos, they are able to, so to speak, connect with the Shechina and become a Merkava to the Shechina. Okay, now we're talking about a new Middah, the Middah of Nosei Avon. Nosei Avon is even more astounding than the Middah of Mikel Kamoicha. You ready? We waited for you until we really began. Okay? V'hareza Gold of MMH. This is even greater than the Middah before. Sheharei lo yaseh ha'adam avon shelo yibarei mashchas. A person cannot do an Avera without creating a destructive angel. The Marsha says, every act, every word, and every thought creates a malach. So when a person does an Avera, you create an angel. Angels are hungry. You're hungry? Men are hungry. Boys are hungry, yeah? They eat a lot. Angels eat more. So who's feeding this angel that you created? Now how do we know that you create an angel when you do an Avera? Ha'over Avera achas. If you create one sin, if you violate one sin, kaineloi kategar echad. you acquire one prosecutor. The prosecuting angel stands before God. And he says, Ploini asa'ani, Yankel Beryl made me. Ve'ein bria now. Okay, now this angel's walking around, but he's a hungry angel. Who's going to feed him? Ve'ein bria miskayos v'olam ela b'shifa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No creation could exist in reality without the beneficence, without the kindness of Hashem. V'harei hamashchas hazeh omed lefanav. The angel is standing here. He's hanging out on your shoulder. How could he exist? Who's feeding the angel? Now God has to feed the angel. So God should say, I didn't make the angel. I shouldn't have to feed the angel. You feed the angel. Now if man would have to feed the angel will eat us. And basically that will be the end of us. Otherwise, what's the alternative? God is going to feed the angel. But it's not God's problem. It's not God's problem. It's like, imagine you lend somebody your car, and the guy gets a ticket, and he got a really hefty fine. So he comes to you, he says, I really appreciate you lend me the car, but now that you lend me the car, I have a ticket and I can't pay for it. So what are you going to tell the guy? I would tell the guy, I have a list. It's called Not My Problem. I'm going to put your ticket on that list that I have. By the way, I have a long list like that. It's a very good list to have. It's a good list. It's always good to have a list. It's called Not My Problem. Now, you should always commiserate and empathize with other people. But not every mess that every guy gets into is your problem. So God should say, hey, angel, it's not my problem that you want to go to Carlos and Gabby's. I am not footing the bill. So the angel would come to man and say, man, hey, he looks like a nice big hamburger. The angel should eat us up. Logically, the angel should say to God, Eini zan mashchisim. God said, I don't feed destructive angels. Go to the guy who made you, and be supported by him. Then the destructive angel will now go down. Miyad immediately, v'noitel nishmasai. He should take away the person's soul. Souls are very nutritious. Yeah, they have a lot of protein. They're packed with, lean protein and carbs. It's like an energy bar. So the angel should go down and eat the guy, eat the soul. Oy karsai, cut him off. Oy nena shalav. So basically, what should happen? The angel should go down. If the guy violated, let's say, a chiv kares, then the angel should take the guy's life. Or the guy, let's say he did a minor sin, he should be punished, commensurate with his sin. And then the destructive angel will dissipate, or until the angel dissipates. In other words, God should tell the angel, you go figure out how you're going to eat. So the angel will either eat the guy, or the guy has to do tshuva. But God should not have to support this angel. I mean, what's God supposed to do now? Feed the angel? How many people, how many freeloaders does Rebbe Shem have to support? So it's bad enough he has to support us, now he has to support the angels that we create? But what does Hashem do? God doesn't do that. He doesn't tell the angel, go consume the guy. Ela Nosei, he bears the soivel ha'avon, he tolerates the sin. U'kamay shehu zan ha'olam kulai, just like God feeds the entire world, zan u'mefarnes hamashchas hazeh, he sustains and he supports this destructive angel. Can you imagine, imagine you came home, you knocked on the door one day, your father said, who's in your room with you? Who? I brought in an illegal alien from Mexico. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So, the next thing is the illegal alien knocks on your father's door and he says, I'm hungry. So your father, she should kick you out of the house also. But he could say, you want to keep this illegal alien, you could keep him, but you're going to have to figure out how to feed this guy. I never brought him in the house. Or let's say you decide to bring a pet into the house. So if you do, your father should disown you. But let's say, that's what I told my kids when they brought in a pet. No, but somehow both them and the pet are still it's still there. But let's say when the pet gets hungry, you should tell them, that's not my problem. I didn't ask you to bring in this pet. You figure out how to feed them. But Hashem doesn't do that. Hashem sustains and feeds the angel Ad sheyeh echad mishlosh adarim, until one of three things happen. Oy sheyashav hachoyte b'tshuva, until the sinner repents. Now, what's tshuva? Part of tshuva is v'aklehu v'vatlehu b'sigufav, and then the angel will be digested and nullified with your afflictions. Basically, back in the day, they had something called Tshuvas HaMishkal. You ever hear of Tshuvas HaMishkal? Tshuvas HaMishkal is like, if you look at Archas Tzadikim, there's like a list. If you wore shatnez, you fast 40 days. If you desecrate Shabbos, you fast 120 days. And nowadays, a guy fasted 2 days, you wouldn't see him again. He would disappear. People can't fast anymore. They can't even go 40 minutes without eating. And the idea of those fasts were when they were on a very high level, so to speak, their meat would trim down. It's like they took their own life, and then they would eat again, and then they would come back to it. In other words, in lieu of their life being taken away, they would afflict themselves. But then in the notes over here, he brings an idea from the Sefer Ar Yakar, which is the purest of the Ramak on the Zohar, that a little bit that a person afflicts themselves is more valuable to Hashem than if Hashem had to afflict the person with much worse. In other words, it's very chashuv in the eyes of Hashem. Let's say a person says, tonight I went to I usually go out and I eat A, B, C, D, and E. I'm just not going to have E this time. Whether that E is the extra dessert or even if a person, so to speak, limits their pleasure intake a little bit as a form of tshuva, that's more valuable to Hashem than if Hashem would have to punish a person severely. That's a very interesting and empowering idea. So in other words, let's say a person says, okay, I have this dessert, I'm not going to have the whole ice cream, I'm going to leave over a little bit, not after I'm not in the mood of it anymore, I'm going to make believe, I'm a big tzaddik. You ate so much you can't even put in another morsel. You had 4 ice creams. Okay, I'm not going to have the 5th. That's going to be my tshuva. It's because you can't even fit it into your system. No, when you want one more bite. You want that one bite, and you say, you know what? That will be my token gesture of limiting my pleasure intake as a form of tshuva. That's more valuable in the eyes of Hashem than affliction. Oy yivatlehu. So in other words, Hashem tolerates and feeds the mashchis until either a person does tshuva, or yivatleu shoyfet tzedek b'yisurim umisa, or a person doesn't do tshuva until God, the righteous judge, destroys that mashchis with punishment if a person doesn't do the tshuva, or yelech begehenim b'sham yifrach, or if ultimately person has to pay the price in the next world. But the bottom line is, until any of these 3 things happens, the mashchus is on God's payroll.
What was the second one?
Number 1 is until the person does tshuva. Number 2 is until a person is punished in this world. Number 3 is even if a person doesn't get any punishment in this world, but when they are punished in the next world, then the mashchus will cease. The point is, until one of these 3 things happen, the mashcha, God foots the bill.
In the second one, what's not mean if these malachim are causing you these Shiurim, or if Hashem is causing?
No, in number 2, in other words, God feeds the angel until the day that he takes this guy out of the world for his sins. So number 1 is, God tolerates the angel person until the person does tshuva. Number 2 is, even if he never does tshuva, God will tolerate the angel until Hashem has to give this guy punishment in this world. Or even if he ultimately does not, God's going to foot the bill of feeding the angel until Gehenna. It's better to do the first one. It's better to do tshuva. Tshuva is the better option. Okay, so v'hainu she'amar Kayin. That's what Kayin said. Gadol avoini minasai. God, is my sin too great to bear? What did Kayin mean? Is my sin too great to bear? Think about the first Middah and think about the second Middah. The first Middah is God tolerates us while we sin. Even while we're sinning, even while we're looking at something we shouldn't, God's giving us that ability. So God should say, I'm going to take it away. No, He doesn't do that. So Kayin says to God, God, you're going to punish me because of this big angel that I created that you don't want to feed? You already tolerate what I did. Can't you also tolerate the angel? That's what Kayin meant. Is my sin too great to bear? You tolerate me, so tolerate my sin. Tolerate this destructive angel. Our rabbis of blessed memory explain. Kol ha'olam kulai. What Kayin was telling Hashem is the whole entire world. Ata soivel. You tolerate. What does it mean? God tolerates it. Yert said that means zan. He feeds it. Umefarnes. He sustains it. Va'avoini kaved. And my sin, Kayin says, my sin is so heavy that you can't bear it. You feed the whole world. You feed billions of ants and flies and mosquitoes and bears. Why can't you feed my angel? Perish lefarnesai. Can't you feed that destructive angel? Ad she'ashav asakin, until I do tshuva and rectify it. That's a pretty tolerant midah. That we made this big monster. He eats a lot, and God pays for it. God should say, get lost. You pay for it. You made the mess, you clean it up, you know? Imkein harezu midas savlanus gedola. This is a great tolerance. Sheyazun v'yifarnes briyara. That Hashem feeds and supports a bad creation, shabara hachoite, that the sinner created, until a person does tshuva. Yilmoid ha'adam, a person should learn from here. Kama tzarach sheyiyah savlan, how tolerant you need to be. Learn from here, you have to be very tolerant. You know, in Pirkei Avos, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi tells his Talmidim, go out and see what is the good path that a person should choose. And different Tanoim said different things. One said, ayin toiva, you should have good eye, meaning what he meant was through having a good eye, you'll acquire all the midos tovas. That's what Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was getting at. He was like, go out and see you can't focus on everything, you can't grab everything. So what one midah could you acquire that through that midah you'll get all the good midos? So one Tana said, get a good eye. One Tana said, try to be a good friend to one person, and from there you'll acquire all the good midos. One Tana says, try to be a good neighbor. And Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch says, Leiv Tov, have a good heart. And which Tana was most correct? So the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi said, from everyone's words I see that Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch was the most correct. Now what's a Leiv Tov? Rabbeinu Yonah says Leiv Tov is the midah of Ratzain, which he defines as being a savlan, to be tolerant. To be tolerant is the best of all the midas. He says it includes speaking softly, gently, sweetly. But tolerance is the greatest of all the midas. In fact, the Chavos Avava says one of the 3 reasons why Hashem created the world is to learn to be like the angels who are tolerant. Rav Victor Mill, you guys are in the Parsha age, yeah? You're in the Parsha? Something like that, right? Around the Parsha, in the Parsha, coming to the Parsha, trying to figure out the Parsha. Yeah, trying to catch up on the Parsha, yeah? Rav Miller says that the main purpose of the institution of marriage is to learn to be tolerant. Because when you're a bachelor, what do? You stay out as late as you want. You come into your room. You take out the toothpaste. I hope you use toothpaste. If you use toothpaste, you squeeze it on the thing. Half of it goes on the side of the sink, and you just leave it there like a mess. Then you throw your socks on the floor, and then all of a sudden, there's somebody telling you what to do. And you like it hot, and maybe they like it cold, or they have this preference, and you have the exact opposite preference, and you have to learn to become tolerant. That's why God created marriage. So you say, why do I need that? Maybe the answer is, this is from this Middah of tolerance, you acquire all the Middos Tovos. So, and we have to learn tolerance from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because God not only has to support our mess, not only does God sustain us while we're doing the wrong thing, but then the mess that we make, He has to pay, He pays for it every single day. He takes our monster out to dinner and breakfast and lunch, and He puts it on His bill. Can you imagine? The monster goes to the restaurant, he eats, I don't know what he orders, and he gives God has to pay the bill and tip the waiter. You know, and Hashem tolerates it until we do tshuva. So Yilmaid ha'adam, person should learn kamat sarach sheyiyah savlan. How much we have to be tolerant. Yizboil avel chaveroi, to tolerate the iniquities of our friend, the infractions of our friend, v'ra oisav, and the evil shehira that they do wrong. Ad shir kazeh, to the extent Sha'adayin ra'asai kayemes shechata negdai, that even when their evil remains and stays and is present in front of you, and the mess is there, v'hu yizboil, and you tolerate it, ad yisakin chavera, until your friend fixes it up, or until it corrects itself, the kayetze, or the like. So this is really the astounding tolerance of Hashem, and we mentioned that Rabbi Matisyahu Solomon said, this is one of the reasons it's called the Middos Elyonos, because nobody could have conceived on their own that the Rebbeinu Shalom could be so tolerant. You know, it's not like we could have ever dreamed up such a thing. So it's a level that we can only know through Messiah, not through our own seichel. Yeah, for this week we're going to hold it over here, okay? Just go ahead.